Hello and welcome to Closing the Achievement Gap, where we're going to focus on how Tier 2 instruction meets the needs of students. I am Mary Colleen Covington. I more commonly go by MC. I'm a literacy specialist and reading interventionist at Corpus Christi Catholic School in Holland, Michigan. Before this, I was an elementary teacher in multiple states, a former middle school language arts teacher, and I'm a big supporter of parochial schools as both an alumni and a parent.
Hi everyone, I'm Allison Larson and I'm the math specialist and interventionist at Corpus Christi in Holland, Michigan. Before this position, I was a former elementary school teacher, I've been a math coach, and I am also a big supporter of parochial schools. We are really excited that you're joining us today to talk about bridging that achievement gap, and our focus will be specifically on doing so with Tier 2 instruction. So the questions that we're really hoping we can answer for you during this webinar today are, what is Tier 2 instruction? What do Tier 2 students need? What can Tier 2 instruction look like? Who needs Tier 2 instruction? And when do I provide that Tier 2 instruction? So let's get started with that first question. What is Tier 2 instruction or intervention? We have a very basic definition here, but our goal is, as this webinar continues, that this definition for you will evolve. So we have that Tier 2 instruction is providing students with additional support to help them reach independence with mastering grade level material. One of our goals today is to really talk about the importance of why Tier 2 instruction is necessary. And the best way to do that is to relate it to the medical field. So we have this analogy here, and we want you to pretend that you are a doctor. You are meeting a patient for the very first time. Upon meeting this patient, he seems to be fine, he looks fine, but then you do a little bit of digging and find out he has high blood pressure. Now, in order to solve the problem, are you going to send him straight to open heart surgery? No, of course not. You're going to start working on his daily routine to improve his health. Now, this could be medication, it could be exercise, but something to help and at least check in to see if it's working. That's how we can think of Tier 2 instruction. If our students are not meeting their goals and the objectives for our Tier 1 instruction, are we going to send them straight to Tier 3 interventions? Are we going to send them down the hall to our interventionists or to our special ed teachers? No, we want to make sure that we are providing them as a classroom teacher the support that's necessary, and we're going to keep monitoring that just like we would with high blood pressure to see if it's working. And if that's not working, then we're going to maybe change our plan a little bit to see if something else works. And that's really the importance of Tier 2. That's why it's necessary, because we can often catch those students just with Tier 2 instruction before having to go right to Tier 3. You've heard me use the words Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 quite a bit on the previous slide. We're going to take a moment to identify what those mean so that we're all on the same page moving forward. Now, I have a visual here on the screen, which you might be familiar with, and it's a common RTI, response to intervention, triangle or visual that we might use to explain the support needed in classrooms. So you can see the triangles are separated. We've got our red, which is our Tier 1, our whole class instruction, our Tier 2, which is that small group, and that's where this video lives today. Those are the students we're really focusing on. And then our Tier 3 instruction, which are going to be just a few students who need more intensive support. This is a good visual, but we have a model that we feel like does a better job of really showing what tier instruction should look like in a classroom. and it looks like this. Now you'll notice a couple different things. Our triangle is actually upside down, and we don't have those hard lines. Our colors bleed together. We really like this model, for one, because we don't like identifying our students as tier 1 students or tier 2 students. We like to flip our thinking and view it more as our tier 1 instruction and our tier 2 instruction and our tier 3 instruction or interventions. And the reason that is because our students shouldn't be stagnant in groups. One area or one concept, they might only need tier 1 instruction, but then in another area, they might be a student who needs tier 2 instruction. And that can change depending within content areas. So for example, we have a 2nd grade student who is typically a student who only needs tier 1 support. However, she was gone for a week, and when she came back, we found after doing some formative assessments that she was not meeting our goals and our objectives for that core instruction. And so she became a student who needed some tier 2 instruction, and just for a little bit of time to get her caught up. Now, the other thing we like about this is the definition. So our tier 1 students, our tier 1 instruction is for all students, and that needs to be very effective instruction. Our tier 2 instruction is going to be for some of those students, and that's additional support that happens within the classroom. And then finally, down at the bottom, we have our tier 3 instruction, and that's going to be just a few students who need more significant support to help them meet our goals and our objectives.
The next thing we're going to talk about is what tier 2 can look like and what is it that your tier 2 students need. The first component here is extra time. Extra time can mean you setting extra time for your students to spend time with them, either one-on-one or in a small group setting. The other can mean giving them extra time to complete their assignments. If you feel like an extra 5 minutes, an extra 15 minutes is what that child needs, maybe even more, in order to show what they truly are capable of. I know it can feel like as a teacher, there's always more that we need to be accomplishing, right? But think about the value in getting that high quality piece out of that student. And if it means giving them a little extra time in order for you to be able to see that they really can meet the standard, that is okay, because that is one of the things that most often can show us what our students are truly capable of. As we mentioned, there's a smaller group size. The next is having a more narrowed instructional focus. So obviously with your mini lessons or your whole group lessons, you're teaching to a certain standard. But tier 2 students often need that standard either retaught in a different way or in that smaller group setting. And a lot of times just incorporating some clear visuals and other learning supports in that time can really help them to understand better what it was you were aiming to teach that day. And the final thing is collecting data more frequently. And collecting data more frequently actually is going to tie in really nicely with this narrowed instructional focus. And we're going to talk about that more later when we talk about observational notes and how they can help you decide what you're teaching to your tier 2 students. So if you have a piece of scrap paper handy and a pencil, I just want you to number it 1 through 4. And as you're watching this teacher teach, I want you to just check off if you notice her do one of these components. Obviously, it would be great to have a perfect video, but I can tell you at least one of these will probably be missing. But yeah, just keep an eye out for each of these things as you're watching it, and just really paying attention to how this tier 2 group might look in your own classroom.
Providing instruction in flexible small groups allows the teacher to target literacy instruction to children's observed and assessed needs. In this classroom, the teacher meets with 2 small groups to provide explicit instruction in reading strategies.
So today you're going to watch me working with 2 groups of students to work on some really specific strategies that I've noticed they needed work on. So today you're going to watch me ask them and teach them how to stop at the point of error and go back and reread so that it makes sense to them. Today I'm going to teach you what to do when you're reading something and it doesn't make sense. I have two signs here, okay? One is a stop sign.
To stop when you're running and the cars are going.
That's a good connection. That's a good connection. It's the same stop sign that you see in traffic, but this time you're going to use it during reading. When you read something and it doesn't quite make sense, you're going to stop
And go back and read it again. Just like you tell me a lot of times that go back and read it.
That's a great strategy. Do you see this sign?
Yeah.
This sign tells you to go back and reread. So when something doesn't make sense, you have to stop, and then you're going to go back and reread it to make sure it does make sense. That's what readers do, okay? Can I teach you how to do that? Reading this? I'm going to show you, and then you're going to have a chance to practice, okay? Now, watch what I read. Cheese shapes and crackers. Materials: slice of cheese, crackers, cookie cutters, cooking board. What? Cooking board? I don't know what a cooking board is.
I do.
That doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to go back and read it. I have to stop. It didn't make sense. Cooking board? I've got to go back and reread and make it make sense. Okay, let me go back. Cookie cutters, cutting board. Oh, I know what a cutting board is.
Yeah.
I've used that before in my kitchen. Yeah, you cut stuff on.
I'm going to pause here and skip ahead just so you can see when she starts working with a student individually.
Reread. Pulling this small group allows me to really be explicit about my teaching and the strategy that I want students to learn, and also affords them the opportunity to practice that skill with me being right there and having the ability to respond to them immediately. No, stop right there. You said ill sing in your show. Does that make sense?
In yours.
Stop. You said ill sing in your show. That doesn't make sense to me. Can you go back and reread?
I'll sing in your show.
Does that make sense to you? Great job.
So as you can see, I'm sure many of you checked off extra time because we can see that she's taking extra time away from the whole group to work with this small group. Then obviously ties in perfectly with small group. Next, I hope most of you were able to check off that she had a very narrowed instructional focus. She had clear visuals to help support their learning, both the big visuals she was using during her lesson and then the small visual supports they could each have in front of them as a reminder as they were reading independently. This is the one that I didn't see. We can assume that since she did have such a narrowed instructional focus, that at some point she's collected data on this group of readers to know that this is something that they need more instruction on. And we can know that especially because this little girl here that she was reading with even said, oh, that's something you tell me all the time. So as we mentioned, how do we know, or how did she know, one, who that group needed to be, and two, how did she know what they needed to work on? And I told you that we could assume she likely took some sort of observational notes for her data collection. So we're going to talk about that in these next few slides. So you really need to be collecting data daily on your students. And it doesn't have to be scary. We've got this fun little comic here to show you it. The boy is saying, I taught Stripe how to whistle. The friend says, I don't hear him whistling. The boy says, I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. So when you think about your students and you think about those times, I can relate as a classroom teacher to these times when you feel like you're teaching them, and it just doesn't seem to be sticking. So you need to have data knowing who it isn't sticking with, because that's where your tier 2 groups are going to come in. But one of the ways I really like to do this is with observational notes, because if you find one that works well for you, this really can be an easy way to regularly collect data on your students. I've seen teachers use sticky notes. So they have a notebook with a page dedicated to each student. And that way, all they have to have is in the palm of their hands a pad of sticky notes. And as they walk around the room and they're thinking about what was my instructional focus for today? What was your standard that you were covering? And you're walking around and you're looking for evidence that students are understanding the standard and also for evidence that they aren't, and really knowing what it is they're missing so that you can pull them into those small groups to target that specific need. I personally like a good old piece of loose leaf. I work with small groups regularly. So for me, this works well because I'm able to just kind of draw the number of lines down to create some columns. So say it's a group of 2 students, I would draw one down the middle, write each of their names, and then I would just kind of jot down my own quick notes. What was it I was covering for the day and how did they do with meeting that goal? And that way I can draw little arrows for the next day to say, I really need to reteach this, or here's what I think my next steps are. Some of you may have used a checklist or seen someone use a checklist where you're going to put your standards across the top that you're covering for the unit, and there's names going down, and you're just writing down quick little notes or check marks if you notice that they're meeting it, or maybe you have another indicator if they aren't, and you know those are the groups, and you can start to see, okay, I've got 5 kids in this column who are not meeting this standard yet. I need to pull that group and do some more narrowed focused instruction on this particular standard. And finally, this is another way is if you want to put the goal at the top of this little box, each student would have a page like this, and then you're just writing notes on that specific goal and how the student's doing with meeting that goal. Here's some examples in literacy. I'm currently teaching a nonfiction writing unit in 2nd grade, and so I know this says opinion here, but I was doing more of an expository. Day 1, I did a quick assessment on them. I handed them a very short writing piece that I wanted them to do so that I could start to see what were some skills that they were lacking and what was I going to need to teach small group to specific groups of students. So a quick little formative assessment can give you so much information, because then you can sort these assessments based on who is still not spelling common sight words correctly, who is struggling with finger spacing, who is struggling with capitals and lowercase letters, who's struggling with punctuation. Then I've created a checklist so that I know which standards I'm covering in the unit, and I'm able to regularly observe who's meeting that standard as we're doing this writing process and who needs further instruction on those specific standards. So one that I have them working on is spelling sight words correctly. And so I'm taking notes on who I'm noticing in their pre-writing time and in their first drafts, who isn't spelling their sight words correctly and who's going to need to be pulled to the small group table in order to have a lesson on how to find those sight words and what resources they have to correct them. Another one is forming letters correctly and legibly in printing. I've got a couple of students who still struggle with writing B versus D, or they're writing capitals in the wrong spots. And so I'm able to pull just those 2 students and work with them specifically on that need, because to teach this as a whole group lesson wouldn't make sense because most of the group does not need this anymore. But the small 2 of them that do, it's best to do that in a small group setting.
Now that we've taken a moment to look at a language arts example, let's take some time to explore what a formative assessment could look like in math. One of the easiest ways to get a feel for how your students are doing is to give them an exit ticket after your lesson for the day. It should be short, 2 to 3 problems. It should not take them long to complete, but it should also give you a wealth of information on how your students are doing. Oftentimes when we look at an assessment, we'll say, okay, this group of students mastered the concept, this group of students did not. But it's really important we take the time to dive in and dig a little deeper and see what errors our students are making. So for example, one of our teachers at our school had given an exit ticket similar to this on 2-digit subtraction. And she really wanted to find out for the very next lesson, the next day, how she could group her students to meet their needs and address any errors or misconceptions they might have. So here's a sample exit ticket, and once she gave that to her students, she was able to determine this small group of students needs to focus on regrouping, correctly, this group of students needs to focus on starting at subtracting from the top instead of the bottom. And then we had another group of students that are still working on their basic math facts. And so it gave her a wealth of knowledge. What she did with that information is then she made a scoot around the room for her entire class. And that's basically where she put up different math problems based on students' abilities. And they were given a color and they had to follow that path. Now, it was based on what these students needed, but they thought it was just to keep them separated and make sure that there weren't too many kids at one location at a time. And then while the students were doing these problems around the room, which they thought was so much fun, she was able to pull small groups and really work on those areas that students needed a little extra support. So that is an example of what Tier 2 instruction could look like during a math class. And again, she was just pulling, there weren't rotations, she was just pulling students that needed support in certain areas. As we're working through the slides, it can feel like Tier 2 is very separate from Tier 1 instruction or Tier 3 instruction. But we wanted to just take a moment and point out that Tier 2 instruction can benefit all students. And we have a great visual to just emphasize this. We have a man who needs a ramp to get up to the doors, and then we have a group of people waiting for the stairs. And the man in the wheelchair says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" Well, the man with the shovel responds with, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." And the man in the wheelchair responds with, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." Just emphasizing the fact that Tier 2 instruction can be great for all of our students. And it's not going to be detrimental to them. And so just like this illustrates, if this man had focused on the ramp first, it would have allowed everyone to be successful and get to the school, and then he could have gone back and shoveled the rest of the stairs. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. Intentional, well-planned accommodations during a lesson not only benefit the student in need, but all students. Now, MC is going to take a moment and share with you what Tier 2 instruction can look like whole group.
What can Tier 2 look like during core instruction? Because it's not just about pulling them into small groups. It's also about changing expectations for students during core instruction. So we're going to watch a kindergarten teacher do this. She's going to use a variety of strategies, both engagement strategies for during her whole group lesson that would be similar to whole brain teaching if you're familiar with that, using things like call and response or hand motions. She's also going to be doing something where she's going to differentiate her math lesson, allowing for everybody to show that they can meet the standard, but using different visuals and different devices for her students to represent their understanding. So let's take a look at this teacher in action. And as you're watching, just keep in mind, what do you notice about her strategies that are engaging her Tier 2 learners?
Most of my class did not speak English. Half of my class does not know how to organ. So to be able to not only receive content in your native language and be proficient, but also acquire a second language at the same time, that speaks volumes. And identify the equation.
My goal, my vision was to create independent learners. And I can walk in classrooms and say, my kids are independent learners.
What do you have to do first? A combination. And then you have to write the equation. And then you have to draw our school in general, we believe in not watering down the vocabulary at all. I feel that kids, especially in kindergarten, they need to be introduced to those words that they're going to need. And it's a big word, and they feel like, oh, I know a big word. Combinations are. That's easy to say. Now, can you justify?
Because there's 5 on the top and 5 on the bottom.
We read our story to sleep over, and they had a bunk bed. Who are these kids here? Storytelling, I think, has been for years one of the most useful techniques that any teacher can utilize in the classroom because it engages students in language development and allows them to make learning their own. Who can show me a different way to make 10 so that Alexis is no longer lonely? Who can come and show me a different equation?
2 plus 8 equals 10.
Thumbs up if you agree with his equation. It's okay if you disagree, but you need to explain why. Okay, inner circle, go to your spot. When you see the inner circle, those are my beginner students. And the outer circle are usually my advanced students or my on-grade students. Eyes on me.
Eyes on you.
Los ojitos en mí.
Los
So inner circle is going to have the combinations, okay? In this activity, the inner circle showed the combinations of the outer circle. The outer circle had to write the equation, and they had to explain how do you know.
Because it's 10 is 0, all together is 10 in the top.
And it's just a way of them practicing that oral language skills over and over again. So is it equals? Good job, thinking.
So as you likely noticed, some strategies she engaged them in were those thumbs up, being asked to verbally share the definition, which that's a great strategy for tier 2 because it's either reinforcing what they already know or it's giving them a second opportunity to hear it. Then additionally, she used those mats, which allowed both or a variety of level of learners to show their understanding of the material. So before you go on to the next slide, pause and reflect on what this could look like in your classroom. So when do you do tier 2? We want this to happen naturally. Remember, it can be a part of your whole group activity. Just like we saw this teacher in the Bronx using bunk bed mats for one set of kids and whiteboards for the other. Fit it into times when students are working independently. One-on-one or small group, what would work better for your students? We have classrooms here where it works really well for the teacher to run centers because they have very independent working kids. Other teachers, it's best for them to have a whole group activity and they're pulling kids one at a time or in small groups to their back table. If you're teaching virtually, are you setting up a Zoom meeting with a small group of students or are you setting up a Zoom meeting one-on-one with somebody who needs that extra support? Before you move on, just pause again and reflect. Think, when is this going to take place in your classroom?
As we wrap up our presentation today, we want you to walk away feeling confident that you can do this. And the key to providing tier 2 instruction is keeping it simple. So ask yourself, how can you make the work that you're already doing fit the needs of your students? We're not asking you to design a new curriculum for your students who need tier 2 instruction. It should just be an extension of what you're already doing. And so we have a few examples for you. The first one is a math example. And really, it could just be, what manipulatives do your students need in order to be successful? Maybe most of your students don't need manipulatives, but you might have some who still are relying on them. And I'm going to put a plug out there for something called DigiBlocks. If you haven't heard about them yet, you should definitely take some time and check them out. They're a little pricey, but they have made a world of difference for several of my students. They take place value to a whole new level. Another example would be providing maybe a web for vocabulary so that you're front loading your lesson so students have context and they have some background knowledge before you're starting whatever unit it may be. When we're talking about writing, maybe they need a graphic organizer to help them plan out their writing. And in fact, this is a great strategy when we're talking about providing Tier 2 instruction to all our students. A story map is a perfect example of that, and you may already be doing that. But we want you to just remember to keep it simple. It should feel natural, and that's how it's going to be the most effective. So as we leave you today, we want to end with this quote, and it's by Zaretta Hammond, and it just really embodies what we hope you walk away with. We want you to remember that we want our children to feel fired up about their learning. And she says, getting children's brains fired up so those brain cells can grow is the only way we are going to close the achievement gap. So really asking ourselves, what can we do to close that achievement gap? How can we fire up our students' brains so they're ready to learn? We thank you so much for your time today. If you have any questions or would like to get in contact with us, you can see that we have our contact information up on this page. Please feel free to reach out and send us an email with any questions or comments that you may have. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.